Thank you, Emlyn. Thank you, choir. Thank you, congregation, for the good music this morning. I trust that it has been a real blessing to each and every one of you. As announced, we have something special for us this morning, and that's why we have some guests here. Cheryl is going to be sharing her testimony. Last Sunday morning, the message was entitled, When God Stirs the Nest. And I talked about some times in my life when God has stirred the nest, so to speak. And the situation with Cheryl was one of those. And so she's going to share her story this morning. Everybody has a story, at least parts of a story. Our lives, as we live, certainly with some length to our life in this world, creates a story of many parts. This is a story of one part of our life when Cheryl had this accident on January the 7th, 2003. We were in a church at that time, surrounded by people who loved us like you love us here. We have some of those people here this morning. We're glad you're here. I remember going to the hospital and standing there with a number of people, and I saw a person standing kind of away from the rest of us, and I didn't know who she was. But then she introduced herself to me as Bonnie. And she said, I think words like this, I'm just here to support and I'm here to pray. And boy, has she supported. Melanie was a co-worker of Cheryl's. Tremendous support. Thank you all for being here today. The congregation at Benham, I trust, will be touched and blessed. I will probably use my handkerchief often, and that's okay. I am a tender-hearted person, and the tears don't bother me. It's okay. But Cheryl, you come on and you share what you feel led to share with us today about this, and may the Lord bless you.
Well, it's not good when you start out teared up, is it? Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I want to thank everyone for being here this morning. But as Dad mentioned, our extended family is here this morning. And I'm so grateful for each and every one of you to be here today, but not just to be here today, be a part of our lives. And you have been family. And I'm just really grateful that you came today to support once again. I entitled this, That I Can Do All Things. As I thought about what I should title it, the Lord really spoke to my heart, and I kept coming back to those words, I can do all things. And part of the reason for that is, all of us have Bible verses that resonate with us or that are special to us for many different reasons. Even before this time in my life, Philippians 4:13 was one of those verses for me. But during this time, that Bible verse became my mantra. It's the way that I got through every day, by only the means to tell myself I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. So I can do all things, and that's why I titled it that today. just to start out by saying I can't give my testimony without giving honor to my parents, because I was blessed to be raised in a very Christian home. I was blessed to be raised by parents who loved me endlessly, who supported me in all my ups and downs. I was not perfect. I made mistakes, but my parents were always there to help me through those mistakes. They were always there to help me make decisions, life's tough decisions that come our way. And they were there through all the downs. And they were there to celebrate with me through all the highs. And so I cannot start today without giving honor to them for providing me with that Christian home that helped to develop me into the person that I am today, but also helped prepare me for what we went through. Because if I had went through that without the Lord, I don't know where I'd be today. I'm not sure that I would be here. And so I'm very grateful to you both. Because of being raised in a Christian home at a very young age, I learned morals. I learned the values that would guide my life. Like anyone sitting here today, I did make mistakes, but I tried to be a good person, and I accepted Jesus in my heart at a very young age, was baptized by my dad, very special moment for us, and was raised in church and began working in church at a very young age, Sunday school teacher in my early 20s. And felt God's call for me to be a servant for him in any way that I could. I moved back to Hamptonville in June of 2000. And that was after we had been in Rock Hill, Fort Mill area for many, many years. Dad's job with Duke Power took us away from here when I was 10 years old, I think. And so we lived in a couple of different places. But I had graduated high school and went to college in Rock Hill, South Carolina at Winthrop University. But in June of 2000, I felt very strongly the call to move back here to my home, to my roots, even though it was just me by myself. But I felt God leading me to work with the youth at Oak Grove Baptist Church, and one of them's here today. I wanted so desperately to work with those kids, and Wendy and I worked very closely together. Nedra and I worked very closely together. The three of us worked very closely together to make it happen. It took an army, didn't it? But we saw the fruits of our labor as the youth growed and prospered and did so well at Oak Grove. I know that it is what God wanted me to do. I know without a shadow of a doubt that that was the call and that I made the right decision to come back here. But it didn't come without sacrifices. It was very hard. I lost a long-term relationship with my first husband over it. And that was a very, very difficult time for our family. I did not want to be a divorced person. I did not want my marriage to end, but I was not given a choice. When the other party doesn't want to have a part of being married, you're just kind of left holding the pieces. And I couldn't have held those pieces without my mom and dad. They were there to help pick up those pieces. And moving here got me out of that situation into a much better place, a place called home. God's hand was in it all, and we see that throughout my entire story. God's hand is in it all. I met Will on December 22nd, 2001. It was a blind date, and I'll never forget walking into this Christmas party that ended up being 3 couples. That wasn't awkward at all, was it? The other two couples were married. But I walked in, and he was sitting on the couch, and he looked up at me, and I just melted. I really, truly did. I am one of those people who believe in love at first sight, because I believe I felt it that night. And we were together for almost a year, and there were things in the way of our relationship. It wasn't the right time. There were situations that needed to be worked through, and after almost a year, in November, we parted ways as friends. It was a hard decision to make, but it was the right decision to make. And that opened up the door for new relationships. So November of 2001, I was again set up on a blind date and met another man who we started kind of talking and dating a little bit. And so we only knew each other for just over a month. And then that brings us to the day. At the time, I was working at Hawthorne Eye Associates with Melanie and Bonnie, and it was a great family. It was a great working environment. I loved my job. I loved the people that I worked with. Dr. Tara was the owner of the practice, and such a wonderful man, such a wonderful man. And I had a good long 8 years there, and still keep in touch with Dr. Tara and his good wife today. Saw them not too long ago, but it was just a great working environment. And so just as any other day, I left home that morning to go to work in Winston, and got through the day and got in my car to drive home on January 7th, 2003. Only I wouldn't make it home that night. I was coming up Highway 421, and at that time, the speed limit, I think, was still 55 because construction had still been taking place. And so we had just gotten to the point of being before Asbury Church Road, and there was a tractor-trailer truck, and it was in the median. And I thought, how is a tractor-trailer truck in the median? Because it was facing our direction. And I couldn't figure out how it got turned and across the cable on our side. And so the car in front of me slowed down, and I slowed down, and I know in my mind I was trying to figure out how in the world that truck got there. I'm sure the car in front of me was doing the same thing. But I saw the car in front of me swerve quickly to the left. And I did not have time to do the same before I hit a rock. It was about 18 inches wide and 9 inches tall. And I hit that rock with my right front tire. So I pulled over into the median, and there were already 2 other cars in the median, and I was in between them. So I got out of my car, and I walked around to look at my tire, and Wayne has got it pulled up there. I thought, oh, I can't change that by myself. That's not going to happen. So I tried to call Dad. I couldn't get him. So I tried to call Mom. I couldn't get her. And kids, remember, we didn't have the access to cell phones and calls like we do today back then. So we had cell phones, but it just wasn't as heavily utilized as it was, or as it is today. So I tried to call the fellow I was dating. Couldn't get him either. So I'm thinking of numbers that I know in my head, because again, we didn't have the capabilities we have today. And I knew by memory one of our friends at church, Lynn and Tom Herco. I knew that phone number because they were the ones who introduced Will and I. And so I called, and Lynn answered the phone, and I said, Lynn, is Tom there? She said, yeah, he's here. And I said, could he come and help me? And I told her what had happened. She said, sure, he's on his way. So I walked to the car in front of me, and it was a young couple in a Volkswagen Bug. And I asked them if they were okay, and they said yes. And I asked them if they had a cell phone to call for help, and they said yes. They had also hit the rock, so they were waiting for help. And they were young, and they were scared, but they were fine. So I walked back to my car, and then back to the car behind me, and that's where I met Jody. Jody was from Millers Creek, and a very nice person, and he had hit the rock also with both of his tires, and both of the rims, just like mine, were destroyed. And he was on the phone trying to get some help out there. And about that time, another gentleman walked up. He had pulled over. Come to find out, he was a church member that went to church with Jody and had saw Jody on the side of the road. And so Jody and Paul were both there. It takes longer to tell it than it actually happened, so keep that in mind. Another person walked up, and her name was Heather. Heather was a first responder. Heather had responded to the initial accident, which had led to the tractor-trailer truck being in the median. And we learned then that there was an accident that had occurred, and that tractor-trailer truck, when it crossed over the median and broke the cable, it threw that riprap up into the road. And that is what we were hitting, or had hit. So I was the third car that had hit the riprap. So now we have 5 vehicles involved. And Heather said, if you guys are okay, I need to go back to the truck driver. He's having some chest pains. The ambulance is on its way. We said, yes, we're fine. And Jody and Paul were urgently trying to figure out how to get that rock out of the road. It's turning dark, can't see. That rock was pretty big. There were 2 fellas, so the only solution was we're probably going to have to go out there and get it and carry it back. And just in an instant, we heard this awful noise. And I looked up. Jody was standing next to me. Paul was over here, and Heather was over here. And I looked up, and I saw a van flying through the air. And it was headed straight for us. And I know that Jody tells that he reached for me, but he didn't get me. And I turned to run, and it was coming this way, so logically my thought was to turn left. And so I turned left, and I just started running. I don't even know that I made 1 step. I'm not sure. But before I knew it, I felt the impact of that van hitting my whole body and throwing me 40 feet in the air. And I landed. And I do remember flying through the air. And I remember the words in my head was, I'll be there in a minute, Lord. I'll see you in a minute. I was 100% sure that I would not live. When I landed, the air was knocked out of me. I could not breathe. And I was gasping for air. And in the midst of gasping, I was trying to cry, help me, help me, help me, help me. And Jody came running to my side. And I just remember the look on his face as he's standing over me. The van had landed right next to me on its top, and it was on fire. And I was getting burned by the embers. So he threw his jacket over me, and he said, I'm going to get help. I'm going to help you. I'm going to get help. And he left, and then I saw Paul. Paul stood over me, and he said, we're going to get help. We're going to get help. A lot of things were going through my mind. at that time. You know, Dad spoke about the remembrance of it last week. That's not been a great thing for me. It's caused a lot of heartache for me. But as I laid there, I thought I was paralyzed. That was the first thought. I thought, how could this happen to me? I just wanted to go home. I thought, why am I not dead? Because I had already said, I'll be there in a minute, Lord. Why was I there? I realized that I could feel my feet. I realized that I had lace-up shoes on when I left home that day, but I didn't have a shoe on the left foot, and it was really cold. And that was encouragement to me in my head. I thought, I can feel my feet. And I knew I had a shoe on the right foot. So I started kind of observing, I guess, the things that I could feel. I could not feel my thumb, so I had convinced myself that it was gone. My head hurt. My head really hurt. Parents always tell us to make sure we have clean underwear on. That crossed through my mind too. I said, thank goodness I had matching clean underwear on. Let me tell you, nobody cares. Nobody cares. But at that moment laying there, it was a distraction for me to think about things like that. Well, then I saw a face and I heard a voice. His name was Jim. I remember Jim just like it was yesterday, what he looked like, what he said. He was the paramedic that got to me first. I remember lots of arguing about whether to move me or not because the van was on fire. I remember the fire department finally getting there and more arguing about whether to move me. But the ultimate decision was made not to. Probably a good one. The fire department was able to put out the fire. I heard them talking about a little boy that had flew out of the van. So I began asking about him. Is he okay? Where's he at? Nobody knew, but I was very concerned about the little boy. Jim had a very calm voice and a very friendly face. My calmness turned to panic when I realized that they were about to move me, and I begged to be left. Please just leave me here. I begged to be knocked out. I said, please, I don't want to remember this. Please just knock me out. Please don't move me, I kept repeating. And Jim was very patient and very kind, and he told me they had to get me to the hospital. You're not very rational, you know, when you're in a situation like this. And I don't think I was being very rational. But he was very kind in explaining things to me. And when they went to move me to the transfer board, I screamed. The pain, the crunching, my whole midsection moved in a way that I cannot put into words. And I just kept screaming. And Jim said, you got to tell me what you feel. I have to know what you feel. And I told him I could feel everything moving around and crunching in my abdominal area. He said, it'll be okay. And I begged him again to knock me out. I told him he could even use a bat if he wanted to. That would be fine, whatever. But he just kept telling me he couldn't. He needed me alert. He needed me awake. I did not want to talk. I did not want to feel the pain. I did not want to remember. I was loaded into the ambulance, and after I was loaded in, they loaded Heather in beside me. I didn't even realize, obviously, that she was hurt too. When the van was coming, it hit Jody's car and bounced off Jody's car and hit me. And as it hit Jody's car, it knocked Heather into the cable, and she had a huge hematoma on her leg. But she, being a first responder, she cared more about me than what was happening to her. And in my irrational mind and thoughts and comments that I was saying, she was a voice helping to calm me down, helping me to focus, and helping me to let them do what they needed to do. I was in shock. And because I was in shock, they couldn't get an IV started. 8 tries, no luck. That was not fun. And I could hear Jim talking to the hospital, and the fear consumed me at that point in time. As he reported to the hospital, I heard head injury, I heard neck injury, I heard spinal injury, and I was so afraid. I just wanted to close my eyes and forget what was happening to me. My church friend Tom arrived on the scene, but I was not there. They had already taken me away. I can't imagine how helpless he felt when he got there, frantically searching for me. Hard to get answers at that time. And finally finding out that I had been taken to Baptist after being hit by the van. He grabbed my purse out of my car, which was very smart, and he contacted some of our other church family. The news traveled fast, and I'm told that many of them were in the waiting room that night. We had lots of love and lots of support. So many details I could share. I remember so much more than I would like to. I remember arriving at the hospital and the trauma team surrounding me. I would try to fixate on one person like I did Jim, and I had a male nurse, and I do not remember his name, but I fixated on him. And I said, please don't leave me. Just stay with me. Just be my voice. Just stay with me. And he did. I remember giving my parents' phone number to the nurse and telling her to call them. And she came back and said they couldn't reach them yet, but they would keep trying. I remember a phone being put to my ear. And the voice on the other side was Melanie's sister, Lori, who worked at Baptist. I don't know how she found out. I really don't remember. But they put the phone to my ear, and Lori said, Cheryl, do you want me to come just to be with you until your family gets there? And I said, yes, Lori, please come. I said, I don't want to burden you, but if you can, please come. I don't know how long it was, but it wasn't long, and she was by my side holding my hand. I will never forget that. Finally, they got in touch with my parents, and the thought that kept running through my mind was, oh my gosh, they're going to have to drive through the accident scene to get to me. Dad spoke a little bit about that last week. By the time it ended, there were 7 cars involved, and there was tons of fire and rescue, ambulance people. It was a huge accident scene, and I cannot imagine the feelings of having to drive through that, knowing that was your daughter that was involved. And I thought about that while I was laying there. I felt so bad that they would have to see that mess, but I could not wait for them to get there. And I remember them arriving and the look on their faces when they saw me. I remember saying, I'm sorry. And Dad said, honey, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. They offered words of comfort and forced smiles to make me feel better. I kept asking about the little boy because I wanted to know what had happened to him, and I fixated on him. And I remember finally, after the nurses kept assuring me they would try to get information, finally they came back and told me the little boy was fine. Let me tell you, God was in it, because that little boy flew out of that van, didn't have a seatbelt on. He flew out of that van as it was flipping, and he landed on his feet. God was in it. The driver of the van that hit me ended up spending one night in the hospital for a huge blow to his head. But he was released the next day. The truck driver was okay after a day or two. So God was in it. I haven't even been paying attention to the PowerPoint. Wayne, if you want to go on to the next one, let me see where we are. This is one of the Bible verses that kept me going. I kept saying, God will never leave me nor forsake me. So I spent 4 nights in the ICU, and I remember before I got to ICU, when I was in the emergency room, they kept calling me a good Samaritan and said that I had stopped to help. There was so much confusion at the accident scene, they didn't even know who was who. Well, Paul was the good Samaritan. Paul was the one who had stopped to help. And I kept saying, no, I hit the rock, I hit the rock, I hit the rock, I hit the rock. So we were able to get that clarified with the trooper when he came. When I was moved to ICU, we got the final diagnoses. I had a T11 spinal fracture. I had 5 pelvic fractures, a sacral fracture, damaged sciatic nerve on the left side. I had some damage to my left lung, a ruptured spleen. I had C-spine damage, so I had to stay in the collar. I had a laceration to the left leg that needed stitches. I had bruising and swelling of a magnitude that I cannot explain. I remember looking at this arm at one point, and it was the color of my shirt. And this side was the color of my shirt. And I thought, am I ever going to look normal again? I dislocated my shoulder, apparently we found out later, which required surgery for a labral tear. The nurse that I had that first night, she sat with me most of the night, and God placed her there because she prayed with me. I remember her praying with me. And she said, honey, it's going to be all right. She said, I know you want your family, but maybe I can offer you some comfort tonight. And she did. Her prayers helped, and I began to doze a little bit. 4 nights in the ICU, my family could not stay with me, and boy, that was tough. It was tough to wait for those 2-hour intervals where I would see them. And it seemed to me like it took so long for that time to pass. I couldn't move any part of my body when I first got there. And so I spent that time, and I started with one finger, just trying to move one finger. And they would come see me, and I'd say, look what I can do. And then one finger turned to a hand, and then the other hand. And it was a slow process, but I was determined. They tell me that I dreamed of chasing butterflies. I typed on a keyboard. I admired beautiful curtains that didn't exist. I had lots of fun, apparently. We were talking about it yesterday, and we had some friends come to visit me, and Dad said I was really out of it at that time. And his name was Scott, and I was typing on my keyboard, and Daddy said, Scott reached over and said, watch this, and he came and whispered in my ear, and he said, you misspelled a word. And I went, So, I guess we had to find some things to laugh at too, didn't we, Dad? I remember seeing images. It's kind of like a blurry camera with black around it is what those images look like to me. And I remember a man in a trench coat, and that was Dr. Tara. Dr. Tara came to see me, and I remember the look on his face, but I don't remember anything he said. But I know he was shaken, and I know he was wanting to offer support to the family. I remember seeing balloons and thinking, oh, how pretty. I remember one of my employees brushing my teeth. That was embarrassing. But, you know, when you can't do it yourself, it's just whoever's available, right? I have vague memories, but a lot's blurry due to the pain meds. I was moved to a shared room and then a private room. I remember one night specifically that, you know, the nurses were very busy, and we had a couple of instances where they didn't have all the information that they needed. And I just think it's hard for them. We didn't necessarily blame them, but I think it's hard for them. And I had one nurse come in there want me to get up and go to the bathroom, and I was like, I'm sorry, I cannot move. And she was like, why not? I said, well, T11, spinal fracture, 5 pelvic fractures, you know, and she was like, oh, well, I only have that you have a ruptured spleen. You should be able to get up and go to the bathroom. I was like, well, I can't. So that happened a couple of times. But this particular night, I remember my sister was staying with me, and everybody else had gone home. And when the nurses would come to help, I would just beg them to please take their time, because I found that if we took our time, it didn't hurt as bad. And if they rushed, it was extremely painful. And this particular night, 2 nurses came in, and they started moving me in the bed very aggressively. And I just started screaming, and I was crying, and I was begging them to stop. And one of the nurses kept going. She's like, we got to. We don't have a choice. And the other nurse, I think she felt really bad, and she said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry we're doing this. And Cynthia was trying to stop them. And she ended up calling someone else to come to the hospital to help, to get me through the night. And they didn't want family members to press the button on my little pain thing. But I was so out of it much of the time that I couldn't remember to do it myself, and so we couldn't stay ahead of the pain. And the nurses would get mad at me when I would say, you know, I'm in a lot of pain. Well, you shouldn't be. You should be pressing your button. But I couldn't remember to do that. And so my family decided that day they were going to take care of that problem. And they put a schedule together. And whatever the hour increments were supposed to be, that's when the button was pressed. And that helped. We could stay ahead of the pain, and it helped. I could not move my neck at all, and I remember even a week later them coming to take the C-collar off. I cannot tell you the feeling of trying to move something so hard with your brain and your body not complying. I tried so hard to move my neck, and I could not. It's a terrible, terrible feeling. And so I had to keep the C-collar on. It was so uncomfortable, and I wondered if I would ever be able to move my neck, my legs, my arms. I remember Mom picking the glass out of my head, out of my hair, in the mud. It was awful, wasn't it, Mom? My mom was my caretaker in the hospital because the nurses were so busy. She learned how to bed bathe me. She learned how to use a pan to wash my hair. She learned how to change the sheets even when the person in it cannot move. That's a talent. Let me tell you, by the way, that's talent. She cleaned me up and fed me. Anything I needed, she did it. And we watched a lot of DVDs. We had this care team that came around, and they would bring entertainment for us to get through those days. And how many times did we watch Son-in-Law, Mama? It was a lot. Because I wanted to watch something funny, and it was the only funny movie they had. So we just kept watching Son-in-Law. But we didn't get a lot of sleep because rounds started about 4 a.m. And so about 3:30, we'd get up, and I wanted my hair combed, and I wanted to be fixed a little bit because 4 teens were getting ready to come in, and that was a lot of people. And I still cared about how I looked. I even made somebody bring a picture to put on the wall so I could say, hey, this is what I normally look like. Because those first few days, I could not even open this eye. It was so swollen. My face, took a good impact. And I didn't look like myself. My dad had to be the strong one. He had to manage a lot on my behalf. There were discussions with the physicians, decisions to be made. I remember at one point I was supposed to have surgery on my pelvis, and then the next thing I know I wasn't. At one point I was going to be moved to the 6th center, and then I wasn't. So there was just a lot of decisions, and he had to make them all. And he was a representative for our family with the visitors, managing the food, the contributions that were made. He was our rock. And I remember only one time seeing him cry. I was itching so bad from the pain medicine. And I begged him to scratch my legs. Anybody that would come in, I'd say, please scratch my legs. I didn't care if I didn't know him or not. Just scratch my legs. So he was going to pick up my leg to scratch it. And when he did, everything started crunching and moving. And he dropped my leg. And he said, what was that? And I said, Daddy, that was my bones moving. And he had to leave the room. I remember asking for a mirror to see my bruised, swollen face for the first time. It started getting better quickly. And with limited mobility, I was only able to see some parts of my body. And as I mentioned, it was so black and blue. I mean,